Hi, ladies. Welcome to our weekly Quiet Time series. This is a special series, the first time we've ever done such a thing here in the Inland Empire. And my name is Kathy Martinez, and I get to cover the introduction tonight on this amazing book called to Change the World. And this is by my friend, my dear sister, Dr. Helen Sullivan. She and her husband Matt live in Miami, Florida, and they were involved in our lives directly from the year 2012 to the year 2013, and really helped me and my husband so much to get our dream back and to really, help our marriage as well. So it was after Matt and Helen being in our life that we decided to go back into the full-time ministry, leaving our jobs at that time, my favorite job at that time, by the way. But I just want to get you introduced to the book, and then next week our sister Shalini Masman will cover chapter 1, and then every week for 9 chapters, another sister will be covering that chapter so that we can all together get through this book and share our insights, our thoughts in the chats, and as well, please share it with your friends. But I hope that you enjoy. Let's get started. Okay, here we go. So what I'll do is I'll just read a tiny bit of the introduction. There's the whole part of the book where Helen is giving her thanks and giving acknowledgments to everyone that helped her. But the introduction is kind of the beginning of where the book really is coming from. So in the beginning chapter or introduction, page 15, it says here, and I'm just going to read pieces of it, not the whole thing, and kind of highlight parts and comment on parts, and then I'm going to give you a tiny background on the book of Ruth. Okay? So from 1984 to 1985, during Helen's junior year at Stanford University, she was living her dream. And when you read it there, you find out she got to spend a whole year abroad, including going to Ireland and seeing the Ring of Kerry, which is shown here in the book. It's a beautiful picture. See that? I think that's why they call it a ring, because of the shape there. But how beautiful, right? And she had so many adventures with her friend named Liz. She says, Liz and I had so many adventures, far too many to recount here. At month's end, Liz went to Florence, Italy for the summer, and I resolved to go on to Salamanca, Spain. So Helen went from Ireland to Spain to continue her study abroad. Her friend Liz went on to Florence, Italy, and Helen, because she had studied Spanish for 8 years, from 8th grade until her second year in college, she was feeling pretty good about herself arriving in Spain, being able to communicate and speak Spanish there and be understood. And she is very frustrated and even brought to tears because no one understands her and she understands nobody. You have to read the introduction, okay? But then she shares her next adventure, or her next mission was to find her dorm room. And after becoming slightly lost, I asked a nice father and son for directions, but to no avail. I did not know the word, which meant stoplight. So they were trying to help her, but she didn't know what stoplight meant in Spanish. So she still couldn't find her dorm, even with their help. Unfortunately, she says, because of my thick American accent, even the operator on the phone could not understand her when she tried to call her parents on a collect call. She says, I wept yet again. I am so thankful that another girl came to my rescue, talked to the operator, and eventually I spoke to my parents. Can you imagine being in a foreign country and not knowing the language and just really not being prepared because you thought you were prepared? How interesting, right? Exciting and scary at the same time. She says that these adventures continued on and off for about 3 months until she began to get used to the Spanish there in Salamanca. And she says when Christmas vacation arrived, a good friend of mine from high school, Teresa, and I decided to travel to Bilbao, Spain, and stay with her relatives, her friends' relatives. It was on her way to Bilbao that she started to think about her life. She said, we were at a hotel. Teresa was already asleep. I was sitting on my bed thinking about my future. What would life be once I graduated? I would finish college, work for about 40 years, and then retire. I felt so uninspired. I would probably get up, run, go to work, come home, eat, relax, and go to bed. The next day, I would get up, run, go to work, come home, eat, relax, and go to bed. Maybe the next day I would get up, run, go to work, go out with friends, come home, and go to bed. As I imagined life like that for 40 years, I felt hopeless, purposeless. Maybe I would get married, but maybe I would get divorced. Although my parents were happily married at the time, many of their friends, the family friends we had grown up with, were getting divorced. Maybe I would have kids. Maybe they would turn out great. Maybe they would go off the rails. And after all that, I would retire, live for another 20 to 40 years, and die. I sat on my bed. As I sat on my bed, I realized there was really no purpose to my life. For the first time ever, I contemplated taking my life. That only lasted a split second because I knew I could not do that. First, I was certain that if I did, my parents would wrestle with guilt forever. And I knew my hopelessness was not their issue. It was a me issue. They had given me the best life anyone could ever have imagined. Secondly, I knew I could never harm myself. It would be way too painful, and I was just way too much of a scaredy cat. My next thoughts? There must be more to life. What is my purpose? Why am I really here? It was then that I started talking to God. When I left California for my year abroad, I had made a very serious decision. I purposely had left my Bible behind with the mindset that I was leaving God too, and I would do whatever I wanted for the next year. Who would find out anyway? For the first time in my life, I was going to be thousands of miles away from family and friends. And then Helen goes on to describe, how she did arrive on her study abroad with this anticipation of lots of fun and adventure, but she was not spending time with God, which she had grown up going to church. She had grown up going to Bible study and classes, and even when she got to her college days at Stanford, she joined Christian clubs on campus, and she participated in their, what they have like officers in the clubs. She was one of their officers, and yet here she was taking off for studying abroad and leaving God behind too. At least she thought she was leaving God behind. So the story continues. She's asking herself, what happened to that person who used to love church, love God, love Bible study, love doing good? Why did that person choose to leave God behind? Sometimes I wonder the same thing. I would say two things came into play. First, I had become discouraged about not being able to change things in my life that clearly I saw in the Bible needed to be different. Second, the longer I was at Stanford, the more I started to admire and want what the world had to offer. Ultimately, I wanted to be free. I wanted to be able to do whatever I wanted. Ironically, after 5 months of doing whatever I wanted, studying abroad, I found myself sitting on a hotel room bed thinking, what is the purpose of my life? Is it really just to live and die? To have a great career, to have a great family, to have a comfortable retirement, to have grandchildren and possibly great-grandchildren, and then die? This reminded me of a scripture, and she points us to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1 to 11. And I'll read it for us, but when you have time, I would recommend you read it on your own and make your own highlights in your Bible. But it's Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1 to 11. I'm sorry, let me say that again. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1 to 11. And these are the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor does the ear have enough of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Wow! Wow! That's all I can say. Wow! Ecclesiastes and King Solomon, this is deep. But it's also showing us that the Bible addresses all kinds of issues, including when we fall into a deep depression, a deep hopelessness, a despair. It's in the Bible too. Other people have felt that way too. And if you read and read and keep reading, you start to find out the answers. What are the solutions? How did they get through? And I can tell you, Solomon concluded the only thing worth it in life was to worship God. That was the only thing worth it. Everything else was going to, prove itself to be unworthy. But God is worth it. Our relationship with Him is worth it. So Helen told herself, this is what she said, there has to be more to life. If you are real, God, show me. I want to find you. No more fake religion. No Sunday church and everyone, including me, doing whatever we want during the week. Help me find you. And help me find a group of people that truly believe in and live out the Bible. This is it, God. Give me this and I will be all in. Or I'm done with you forever. That was Helen's prayer. That was her request to God. Pretty bold, I think. And after this, she ends up going to London to continue her studying abroad. And in London, she had a 3-month internship there. And she met a woman from Malaysia, an exchange student, so kind of like her, studying abroad as well. And this young woman invited her to come to her church. Helen avoided going for 3 weeks in a row. And then her friend, let's see, what was his name? Richard Young was his name. He was leading a Bible study on the campus that she was going to already, or he was taking her to a Bible study that he used to go to. I'm not sure which way it was. I'd have to read that again. But either way, he told her one day, hey, why don't you come with me to this church I went to? I thought it was really awesome. I think you'd love it. And so she goes with him and finds that same young woman from Malaysia at the church. It was the same church the young woman had invited her to. And so lo and behold, Helen starts to do some Bible studies with members of that church. And eventually she ends up deciding that she needed to become a real disciple, a real Christian, and be baptized. And she says here that God answered my Barcelona prayer. Not Babylonia. I'm sorry. I had found a group of people who truly wanted to know God and were living out His word. On top of that, they were all in. You guys have to forgive me because I could re-record. I could edit and re-record. But this is not a professional production. This is totally amateur by regular women who love God and who love people and who love our church, who do their own jobs and their own lives, and they've volunteered that they're going to help me put on this Quiet Time series. So mine needs to also be raw and uncut and unedited. So please forgive me. All right. Okay. So she goes on to share God's dream. Helen says, this is actually God's dream, that we would not just want to be saved, but that we would surrender our life and our will to Him. When we lack faith that this is God's heart, we can start fighting this idea of surrender. Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. The only cure is to get our faith back through God's word. Again, Romans chapter 10, verse 17. We need to take heart to the scriptures. Romans 8:28. It says there, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. God has great adventures waiting for us, even greater than we can imagine. He's just looking for those who are willing to be used, who are willing to surrender completely to Him, and who are willing to trust His plan. Consider God's scriptures. 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. All scripture is God-breathed and is useful. It's useful. It's still relevant today. After thousands of years, the Bible is still useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that every servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. Amazing, right? And there's so much more. I'm going to jump down to the conclusion here of her introduction. She talks about Ruth. She's giving us an introduction to why she chose Ruth. She says, as you read Ruth's story, you will see a woman who held on to God and valued God more than anything else through thick and thin. She held on to him. She saw her father-in-law die, her husband die, and her brother-in-law die. Yet she held fast to God. Even when she was childless, she trusted God. When her mother-in-law Naomi wanted to send her home, send her to her family and her former gods, who Ruth knew were no gods at all, she refused to let go of her Lord. Ruth held fast to God as she faced prejudice, and she surrendered as she worked in the hot sun day after day as a poor gleaner in the fields, so that she and her mother-in-law could eat. She surrendered as her mother-in-law sent her on a scary mission in hopes of helping her marry. With this surrendered heart, God was able to accomplish his will, the salvation for the nations, through Ruth, and give Ruth more than she could ever have asked or imagined. Ruth was able to marry again, and God blessed their union with a son. This was no ordinary son. He became the grandfather of King David, and thus was in the lineage of King Jesus. Ruth's decision to trust God and surrender completely to his will, even during the most challenging and heartbreaking times, changed the course of history. Indeed, Ruth was called to change the world. Imagine what God will do through you when you completely surrender to him too. So ladies, I hope that really piqued your interest. I hope that you look forward to this series and that you'll come back with us every week to participate in this quiet time. So this is just a brief overview of the book of Ruth. I did a former series and it was on nameless but famous women of the Bible. And for every woman that I chose, every figure, I would give a little background so that we could kind of have a context for the story and who the main characters were, who wrote the book, just to have a better understanding of the writing itself. So that Helen did the same thing. So here we go. She gives us an overview. She tells us in the book of Ruth, God is the protagonist of all 66 books of the Bible, including the book of Ruth. Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz are the main characters. And she notes that, interestingly, the book was named after the only main character who's not a Jew. And in fact, it is the only book in the entire Old Testament that's named after a Gentile. So, sounds like God had plans way back when to bring us all together, Jews and Gentiles. We're all Gentiles if we're not Jews. So, just a little fact. But at the end of the book of Ruth, the reader discovers one of the purposes of the book is to highlight the birth of Obed, David's grandfather. Perhaps the name should have been Obed, or the lineage of David, which would have been more in line with the book's purpose. Yet Ruth was chosen as the title, most likely to make it clear to the Jews that anyone, no matter who they were, could become part of the family of God. And then we'll jump on down to the date and the authorship. Although the Talmud attributes authorship to Samuel, like most ancient Near Eastern literary texts, there's no hint of authorship in the book. In other words, the book of Ruth is written by an unknown author, which is similar to, in the New Testament, there's an unknown author of the book of Hebrews. So we have a parallel fact here in the Old Testament. The most certain time marker in the book is the genealogy of David, listed in Ruth chapter 4, verse 18 to 22. From this, it is clear that the book of Ruth was written sometime after David's birth, and most likely after he became king in 1010 BC. Otherwise, there would be no reason to document his lineage. Additionally, there is no mention of Solomon in the lineage. It would make sense that the book of Ruth was also written sometime before Solomon's kingship in 970 BC. So the timeline is suggested most likely to be between 1150 BC and 1090 BC. That might sound backwards to some of you because I know it used to confuse me, but all the dates BC, they're like a countdown versus, after Christ was born, all the dates are getting higher. But before Christ, it's coming down to a zero. So the dates are 1150 BC to 1090 BC. Okay, the setting. This setting is a narrative, and it is set between. I'm sorry. It is set in both God's land of Israel, and in particular the city of Bethlehem, and in the land of his enemies, the Moabites. The book's initial setting is after the Israelites had started to suffer material, moral, and social decline due to their unfaithfulness to God. Ruth became the bright light in a time of incredible darkness for God's people, so as did Boaz and Naomi, despite Naomi's visible faith struggles. And the genre, it's a Hebrew narrative. Narratives are purposeful stories that retell historical events of the past to give meaning and direction for a set of people in the present and in the future. And like the story of Ruth being a Hebrew narrative, each sister who shares on that chapter will give some of her own personal narrative, which is one of the benefits of having each of us cover a chapter. I'll also be covering one of the chapters, but I don't know which one yet, so you'll have to wait and see. But the audience is intended was the Israelites, and especially those who had doubts about the validity of David's kingship. So there's a particular audience that Ruth is aimed at, and it's those who doubted that David was supposed to become king. Interesting, huh? And let's see. We already covered some of the theme, but there's several sub-themes as well, including that God is always faithful and that God values women and that God loves to extend mercy to all people. The author not only validates but also exalts their most famous ruler, King David, by revealing his God-ordained spiritual heritage. So that's the ultimate purpose, was to clarify who David was and that he was meant to be king and chosen by God. So I hope you got a lot out of this tiny little introduction. We're 22 minutes in, and next week we'll try to keep it to about a half hour as well. So I hope that you've enjoyed it. I hope you'll keep coming back. I hope you'll share with all the women you know, young and old, even teenagers are welcome, because the topics cover all things women, all things around us that we have to deal with, because many things they dealt with then, we deal with today still, maybe in a different form, because, things like the internet, they didn't have the internet back then, but they had other things going on that caused trouble between them. And so I hope this helped everyone. I love you. I'm so happy we're going to do something productive and beneficial. And if it goes well, then we'll do another book after this. Okay? But until next week, love you. Enjoy. Get cracking on these chapters. Make your own notes. It is a study book, so there are questions in each chapter. I hope you'll take the time to treat it as a real devotional, quiet time book. Okay? Love you. See you. Talk to you later. Bye.